On a cold December evening in the year 1900, the Atlantic Ocean crashed relentlessly against the rocky cliffs of a tiny island off the northwest coast of Scotland. The wind howled through the darkness, carrying waves powerful enough to shake the shoreline itself. Standing alone against the storm was a newly built lighthouse, its bright beam meant to guide sailors safely through one of the most dangerous stretches of water in Europe. Inside that lighthouse, 3 experienced keepers were carrying out what should have been another ordinary shift. None of them knew that within days they would disappear forever, leaving behind one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in maritime history. The Flannan Isles are a small group of remote islands located nearly 20 miles from the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. For centuries, they were almost untouched by permanent human life. Shepherds occasionally visited during the summer months to graze sheep, but few people were willing to remain there for long. The islands were surrounded by steep cliffs that rose directly from the sea, while violent Atlantic storms frequently battered the coastline without warning. Local fishermen respected the islands but rarely lingered near them after sunset. Old stories passed from generation to generation spoke of strange sounds carried by the wind, and an unsettling silence that seemed to settle over the islands whenever storms approached. Whether these tales were based on superstition or simply the harsh reality of life in such an isolated place, nobody could say for certain. As international shipping increased during the 19th century, the waters surrounding the Flannan Isles became increasingly dangerous. Thick fog, hidden rocks, and unpredictable weather had already claimed numerous vessels. To improve safety, the Northern Lighthouse Board approved the construction of a lighthouse on the largest island, Island Morge. Building it was an enormous challenge. Every stone, beam, and piece of machinery had to be transported by sea and lifted onto towering cliffs exposed to the full force of the Atlantic. Workers endured dangerous conditions for months before the lighthouse was finally completed in 1899. It was considered a remarkable engineering achievement and quickly became one of the most important navigational lights in the region. Operating the lighthouse required discipline and experience. 3 keepers remained on the island while a 4th stayed on shore, rotating shifts every few weeks. Their responsibilities extended far beyond simply lighting a lamp each evening. They cleaned the enormous lens, maintained the machinery, monitored weather conditions, repaired equipment damaged by salt and wind, and ensured the powerful light never failed. In such a remote location, mistakes could cost the lives of sailors navigating the surrounding waters. In December 1900, the 3 men assigned to the lighthouse were Principal Keeper James Duckett, Second Assistant Thomas Marshall, and Occasional Keeper Donald MacArthur. Each came from a different background, yet all were experienced enough to understand the demands of lighthouse service. Duckett was respected for his professionalism and careful attention to detail. Marshall had already served in several remote stations and was known as a reliable worker. MacArthur was different from the other 2. Before becoming a lighthouse keeper, he had worked as a sailor and had a reputation for being physically strong and fearless. Friends described him as someone who rarely backed away from danger. Life on Island Morge followed a strict routine. Every morning began with inspections of the light, weather observations, equipment maintenance, and housekeeping. During calm weather, the men occasionally watched seabirds circling above the cliffs or ships passing far beyond the horizon. But during storms, the atmosphere changed completely. Massive waves exploded against the rocks below, sending spray high into the air. Powerful wind screamed through every gap in the stone buildings, reminding the keepers how isolated they truly were. Once rough weather arrived, there was no leaving the island until the sea became calm again. For weeks, everything appeared normal. Supply ships visited according to schedule. Equipment functioned properly. And no unusual reports came from the lighthouse. Then, during the middle of December, something changed. Somewhere beyond the horizon, as winter tightened its grip on the North Atlantic, the final chapter of the three keepers' lives quietly began to unfold. During the evening of December 15, 1900, the cargo steamer Archdor was making its way through the waters west of Scotland. The weather was rough but not unusual for that time of year. As the ship approached the area surrounding the Flannan Isles, several crew members noticed something disturbing. The lighthouse on Elan Moor, which should have been visible from many miles away, appeared to be dark. At first, they assumed the light was simply hidden by rain or sea spray. But as the vessel drew nearer, the beams still failed to appear. The captain recorded the observation and continued his voyage, expecting that the problem would soon be reported. Under normal circumstances, a lighthouse blackout would trigger immediate concern. The light on Elan Moor was one of the most important navigational aids in the region, and experienced keepers were trained to prevent even temporary failures. Yet no distress signal arrived from the island and no explanation followed. Because severe weather continued across the area, authorities could not immediately send a supply vessel to investigate. The days passed, and the silence from the lighthouse grew increasingly troubling. The relief ship Hesperus was scheduled to visit the island on December 20th, carrying supplies and a replacement keeper. However, heavy seas forced the captain to delay the journey. Finally, on the afternoon of December 26th, the Hesperus approached Elan Moor. Even before the ship reached the landing place, the crew sensed that something was wrong. No flag flew from the station. No figures could be seen near the buildings. Most ominously of all, nobody responded when the ship sounded its whistle. The captain ordered a relief keeper named Joseph Moore to go ashore. Moore had worked at the lighthouse before and knew the island well. As he climbed the steep path from the landing platform, he expected to be greeted by one of the keepers complaining about the weather and the delayed supplies. Instead, he found only silence. The wind moved through the grass, seabirds cried above the cliffs, and the lighthouse building stood completely still. When Moore reached the compound, he noticed that the outer gate was closed. The main door to the lighthouse was also shut. He unlocked it and stepped inside. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. The interior was not wrecked or obviously abandoned in panic. The rooms were tidy. The kitchen utensils were in place. The lamps had been cleaned and refilled, yet the keepers were gone. Their oilskin coats, normally worn during dangerous outdoor work, were missing from their hooks. A clock had stopped. One chair appeared slightly out of position, as though someone had risen from it unexpectedly. But there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no indication that anyone had left voluntarily for an extended period. Moore searched every room, then hurried back outside and examined the surrounding area. He called the men's names repeatedly, but only the wind answered. The crew of the Hesperus joined the search, combing the cliffs, storage areas, and pathways. Still, they found nothing. It was as if the three keepers had simply stepped out into the storm and vanished from the world. The most significant clues were discovered on the island's western side, near a crane used to hoist supplies from boats below. The normally secure equipment had suffered severe damage. Iron railings were bent. A large storage box had been smashed, and heavy ropes were scattered across the rocks. Even more remarkable, debris had been found far above sea level, suggesting that enormous waves had struck the cliffs with tremendous force. Investigators estimated that water may have reached heights exceeding 100 feet. Inside the lighthouse, another important piece of evidence awaited examination: the official logbook. Thomas Marshall had made regular entries describing weather conditions and daily activities. The final surviving records indicated that strong winds and rough seas had affected the island during the previous days. Later retellings would dramatically exaggerate these entries, claiming that the keepers had written about terrifying storms and unusual fear among the men. Historians who studied the original documents found that many of those famous quotations were invented years afterward. The authentic records were less sensational, but they still confirmed that severe weather had recently battered the island. As darkness fell on December 26th, the Hesperus remained anchored nearby while officials considered the impossible question before them. 3 trained lighthouse keepers had disappeared from one of the most isolated stations in Britain. No bodies had been found, no witness had seen them leave, and the Atlantic Ocean, stretching endlessly beyond the cliffs, kept whatever secret it held. Within days, officials from the Northern Lighthouse Board arrived to conduct a formal investigation. Leading the inquiry was Robert Muirhead, an experienced superintendent who had spent years overseeing lighthouse operations throughout Scotland. Unlike the rumors that would spread decades later, Muirhead approached the scene with a practical mindset. He carefully examined every room, inspected the damaged equipment along the western landing, and interviewed every sailor who had visited the island before and after the disappearance. His investigation quickly established one important fact. Nothing inside the lighthouse suggested that the men had planned to abandon their duties. The lamp had been properly maintained, supplies remained untouched, and personal belongings had been left behind. There was no evidence of violence, no signs of intruders, and no indication that another vessel had landed on the island. Every clue pointed toward a sudden and unexpected event. Attention soon shifted to the damaged western landing. This area was rarely used during rough weather because enormous Atlantic swells could transform the calm shoreline into a deadly wall of water within minutes. Heavy ropes had been torn from their fastenings. A storage box weighing hundreds of pounds had been thrown from its position. Iron fittings had been twisted with surprising force. To experienced investigators, these were unmistakable signs of the sea's incredible power. Muirhead developed what would become the official explanation. He believed that one of the keepers had gone outside to secure equipment after noticing that the storm threatened to damage valuable supplies. According to lighthouse regulations, equipment left unsecured could easily be lost to the ocean during severe weather. A second keeper likely followed to assist him. The third man, left alone inside the lighthouse, may have noticed the danger unfolding through a window. Against normal procedure, he appears to have rushed outside without stopping to put on his heavy waterproof coat, hoping to help his colleagues before it was too late. If this sequence of events is correct, all 3 men would have been standing near the western landing at precisely the worst possible moment. A massive wave, larger than anything they expected, could have crashed over the cliffs with devastating force. Such waves are known today as rogue waves, enormous walls of water capable of appearing unexpectedly, even when surrounding waves seem manageable. The impact would have given the keepers almost no chance to escape. Swept into the freezing Atlantic below, they would have faced violent currents, jagged rocks, and near impossible conditions for survival. The theory explained many of the physical clues, but it left one troubling question unanswered. Lighthouse keepers were highly trained professionals. They understood the dangers of the Atlantic better than almost anyone. Why would all three leave the safety of the lighthouse at the same time, especially during dangerous weather? Regulations generally required at least one keeper to remain inside the station whenever possible. Breaking that rule would have been highly unusual unless they believed an emergency demanded immediate action. Another mystery concerned the weather itself. Some historical records suggested that the strongest storms did not strike the area till after the men had already disappeared. Other reports indicated rough seas had been building for several days. Modern researchers have debated these records extensively, and while minor discrepancies remain, most agree that dangerous ocean conditions almost certainly existed around the time of the disappearance. Even so, the exact sequence of weather events can no longer be reconstructed with complete certainty. As newspapers learned about the case, public fascination grew rapidly. Readers across Britain struggled to believe that three experienced lighthouse keepers could simply vanish without leaving a single body behind. Reporters searched for dramatic explanations, and before long, speculation began replacing evidence. Stories grew more mysterious with every retelling. Some claimed strange voices had been heard on the island before the disappearance. Others insisted that supernatural forces haunted Island more. None of these claims appeared in the official investigation, yet they spread quickly and became part of the legend. The mystery of the Flannan Isles was no longer just an investigation. It had become one of Britain's most enduring maritime legends, inviting generations to wonder whether the official explanation truly told the entire story. As the years passed, the official explanation failed to satisfy everyone. For many people, the evidence seemed incomplete, and unanswered questions continued to fuel speculation. Writers, journalists, and amateur investigators revisited the case repeatedly, each proposing a different solution to the mystery. Some theories were based on careful analysis, while others drifted into the realm of folklore and imagination. One of the earliest alternative theories suggested that the three keepers had become involved in a violent argument. Donald MacArthur, in particular, was often described as a man with a strong personality and a quick temper. Over time, this reputation led some authors to imagine that a fight had broken out inside the lighthouse, ending in tragedy. According to this theory, one man killed another, a second attempted to intervene, and the survivor eventually threw himself into the sea out of despair. However, investigators found no blood, no damaged furniture, and no evidence of any struggle. The lighthouse remained remarkably orderly, making this explanation extremely unlikely. Another theory proposed that the keepers had been taken by an unknown vessel. During the early 20th century, rumors of smugglers and foreign ships operating along remote coastlines were common. Some believed a passing crew may have landed on Island Moor and encountered the lighthouse keepers under mysterious circumstances. Yet no ship reported approaching the island. No footprints from strangers were documented, and no physical evidence supported the idea that outsiders had ever entered the station. As interest in the mystery grew, supernatural explanations became even more popular. Local legends already described the Flannan Isles as lonely and mysterious places, where strange events had occasionally been reported for generations. Some storytellers claimed the keepers had encountered ghostly figures wandering across the cliffs. Others believed ancient spirits protected the islands and punished anyone who disturbed them. A few even suggested that enormous sea creatures had dragged the men into the ocean. These stories captured the public imagination, but none were supported by historical evidence. Perhaps the most influential source of confusion came from the Lighthouse logbook itself. Over the decades, dramatic quotations began appearing in books and magazine articles. According to these versions, one keeper had supposedly written that the winds were unlike anything he had ever experienced. Another allegedly recorded that Donald MacArthur, a seasoned sailor known for his courage, had been seen crying during the storm. Finally, the last entry supposedly ended with the chilling words, "God is over all." These passages helped transform the disappearance into a worldwide legend. They appeared in documentaries, newspaper features, and countless television programs. There was only one problem. Researchers later discovered that these famous entries were almost certainly fictional. The original records did not contain such dramatic statements. Historians now believe they were invented years later by authors seeking to make the story more emotional and mysterious. Although these fabricated quotations continue to circulate online today, they are not considered authentic by most experts. Modern oceanographers have also examined the case using a better understanding of Atlantic wave behavior. They point out that rogue waves, once dismissed as myths by many sailors, are now scientifically documented. These enormous waves can rise unexpectedly, combining the energy of multiple swells into a single wall of water, capable of reaching astonishing heights. Along coastlines like those of the Flannan Isles, where steep cliffs reflect incoming waves back into the sea, conditions can occasionally produce extremely dangerous surges. To many specialists, this remains the simplest and most convincing explanation. Even after more than a century, however, certainty remains impossible. No bodies were ever recovered. No eyewitnesses observed what happened on Eilean Mor. The Atlantic claimed whatever final evidence existed, leaving only damaged equipment, an empty lighthouse, and a story that continues to fascinate people around the world. More than 125 years have passed since the disappearance of James Duckett, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. The lighthouse on Eilean Mor no longer relies on resident keepers. Advances in technology have automated its operation, and today its light continues to sweep across the Atlantic without the presence of anyone living inside. The silence that once surrounded the station remains, broken only by the crashing waves, the cries of seabirds, and the endless wind moving across the cliffs. Visitors occasionally travel to the Flannan Isles, though few stay for long. Those who step onto the island often describe an overwhelming sense of isolation. There are no villages, no permanent residents, and very little to remind visitors that three men once carried out their daily lives there. Standing beside the lighthouse, it is easy to understand why the story has endured for more than a century. The landscape itself feels untouched by time. For historians, the Flannan Isles mystery serves as a reminder of how easily legends can grow around real events. Over the decades, books, films, and television programs have added dramatic details that were never supported by official records. Fictional diary entries, exaggerated witness accounts, and supernatural claims gradually became part of the public's understanding of the case. Yet when those stories are stripped away, the documented facts remain just as compelling. 3 experienced lighthouse keepers disappeared while performing one of the world's loneliest professions. Their station showed no signs of panic or violence. Their personal belongings remained behind. The surrounding coastline displayed evidence of tremendous wave damage. No bodies were ever recovered, and no eyewitness ever came forward with an explanation. These facts alone are enough to make the case extraordinary. Most modern experts agree that the men were almost certainly victims of the sea. The Atlantic Ocean has claimed countless lives throughout history, often leaving little evidence behind. Rogue waves, powerful currents, freezing water, and unforgiving cliffs create conditions where even experienced sailors can disappear within seconds. If that is what happened on Elan Moor, the ocean erased nearly every trace of the tragedy before investigators ever arrived. Still, absolute certainty remains out of reach. Without eyewitnesses or physical evidence beyond what was found on the island, no one can reconstruct the final moments with complete confidence. Did one keeper notice equipment breaking loose and call for help? Did the others rush outside to save him? Did a single unexpected wave end 3 lives in a matter of seconds? These questions may never be answered. Perhaps that uncertainty is why the Flannan Isles mystery continues to captivate new generations. Unlike many famous historical cases, it contains no confirmed villain, no dramatic confession, and no final revelation waiting to be discovered. Instead, it leaves us with something far more unsettling: the possibility that nature alone can create mysteries every bit as haunting as fiction. As daylight fades over the North Atlantic, the lighthouse still casts its beam across the same waters where 3 men vanished in December of 1900. Ships continue to pass safely through the darkness, guided by a light that has outlived the very people who once kept it burning. Somewhere beneath those cold and restless waves lies a story whose final chapter was never written. And perhaps, after all these years, the Atlantic Ocean is the only witness that truly knows what happened on the Flannan Isles.